Welcome to Body Kindness. I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, creator of the Body Kindness Philosophy book and audiobook. I'm here to help you create a better life by reinventing health from the body oppressive, shaming, and you'll never be enough type of mindset to positive and joyful ways that you can spiral up your energy, mood, and your well-being at any size, shape, or weight, and as you are right now. Get started for free at bodykindnessbook.com/start. That's the sound of me smashing a stack of scales in front of some friends. And I have to say that breaking up with the scale and all the other ways I was judging, monitoring, and measuring my worth was absolutely pivotal in my life. Creating the body kindness philosophy and letting myself be a human being again helped me become a better mom, a better clinician, and a happier and healthier person. I believe we all have a right to decide how we want to care for ourselves, and I think we all need support in figuring out what that looks like. You don't have to do this alone. There's a whole community of like-minded people who are fed up with diets, who are embracing intuitive eating, and who are completely redefining their lives from body shame to body kindness. You are not broken. Our culture is. Find your inner caregiver and create a better life with body kindness.
What this book is saying specifically is that believe me is a big idea. You know, it gets treated on Twitter as this facile little pat thing where as though we're all saying everyone should just believe women every time they say anything, which of course is a ridiculous idea. But the argument actually is we desperately need a culture that treats women as both fundamentally baseline credible and important.
It's so hard because, you know, when women say, well, I'm not going to be believed, a lot of the time they're right. Yep. Right. And they do have to trust that experience. And when we say to women, come forward, whether it's coming forward about sexual assault or just talking about your own personal experience with your body, right? Mm-hmm. Women know that they're not going to believe. And so I think that there is some danger in just putting out this like sort of easy way, like, no, don't worry, we all have to speak out. We all have to speak our truths. Well, we know that there are consequences to that, right? In a perfect world, that wouldn't be true, but often there are. And that was, I think, part of the reason with the book that we wanted to imagine, you know, what would the world look like if that wasn't the case, if that fear wasn't there, if we knew that there would be, as Jaclyn said, that baseline acceptance of women as credible and important.
That was Jessica Valenti and Jaclyn Friedman. They are the co-authors of the new anthology, Believe Me, How Trusting Women Can Change the World. Jessica Valenti is called one of the top 100 inspiring women in the world. She's a columnist for Medium and a feminist author. Her most recent book, Sex Object, a Memoir, was a New York Times bestseller. In 2004, Jessica founded the award-winning blog Feministing.com, which Columbia Journalism Review called head and shoulders above almost any writing on women's issues in mainstream media. Jessica's articles have topped the most read lists at the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Guardian, and The Washington Post. She's also written for Salon, Bitch, Ms. Magazine, and The Toast. She's been profiled in the New York Times Magazine and is a widely sought-after speaker. Jaclyn Friedman has been a guest on Body Kindness. She's the host of the Unscrewed podcast and author of the book Unscrewed, which was amazing. I've got the link for that in the show notes. She's an educator, activist, and the force behind 4 hit books, Yes Means Yes, Visions of Female Sexual Power and a World Without Rape, which is one of Publishers Weekly top 100 books of 2009. What You Really, Really Want, The Smart Girl's Shame-Free Guide to Sex and Safety, Unscrewed Women, Sex, Power, and How to Stop Letting the System Screw Us All, and Believe Me, How Trusting Women Can Change the World. Her podcast, also called Unscrewed, is paving new paths to sexual liberation and was named one of the best sex podcasts by both Marie Claire and Esquire. Friedman is a popular speaker on campuses and at conferences around the U.S. and beyond. She's been a guest on The Today Show, Nightline, PBS News Hour, Call Your Girlfriend, and numerous other audio and TV shows. And her commentary has appeared in outlets including the New York Times, Vox, Refinery 29, The Washington Post, Glamour, and The Guardian. And I need to take a breath. Obviously, you could tell from their bios that these are two powerful and accomplished women. And yet here we are today putting out new books about how it's not fair. This stuff ain't right, and we need to do something about it. I hope you will consider picking up this book after you listen to the podcast. The bottom line, you're going to hear us talk about several of the essays that appear in this book that really help us understand why we need to structure a society as if women's lived experiences and insights were just as important and reliable as men's. So you'll hear us connect the practice of body kindness and our individual lived experience to believing ourselves. And all the way through these essays where there's different insights and points that really help us examine where culture is missing the mark today, including us as three white women feminists, how we're missing the mark on intersectionality and what we can do about it. And then we pivot in a close discussing what people of power can do. And I've also have some ideas for some journaling prompts that you could do for yourself to identify ways in which you haven't believed yourself in the past, in practicing having those boundaried and advocating for yourself conversations so that you could have them now and in the future. I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Be sure to check out all the links in the show notes. And before we get into the chat, just a quick reminder, whether you are just beginning body kindness and are just picking up the book or you've read it several times, I am doing a free book club. It starts in February, and that's going to be in the Facebook group, which is also free. It's called Body Kindness Insiders. The best way to get involved is visit bodykindnessbook.com/start. Give your name and email because I'm going to integrate you in the body kindness philosophy. You're going to get invited to join the Facebook group. And you're going to be up to date on the latest podcasts and body kindness happenings as well. So I hope to see you there. Thanks and enjoy the show. Jessica and Jaclyn, welcome to Body Kindness.
Oh, so happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
I am so thrilled to be talking to you both today and to celebrate the release of your latest collaboration. It's called Believe Me, How Trusting Women Can Change the World.
It sure is. We're so excited about it.
Yeah, I really hope that we can have an enlightening conversation for the Body Kindness listeners today. You know, who I think, you know, primarily when they come to find the practice of body kindness, they're just trying to like escape diet culture and like, gee, wonder what it would be like to have compassion for myself in this world that wants me to hate my body. And
sure,
you know, the reality of it is you can't practice body kindness in a vacuum, kind of oblivious to the world that's going on around you, because it's quite often the oppressive forces of the world that make being good to yourself so difficult. So I really hope to stretch the listeners' minds around how we can, yes, practice what we need to do to get through our days and be good to ourselves with eyes open, looking outward to the world, and do a better job at using the power of our voices and collaborating and connecting so that we can help make the world a better place as well.
Yes. But also, can I just say, like, Believe Me starts at home, right? That a lot of the reason we have disordered eating or complicated, painful relationships with our bodies is because we don't believe that our body knows what it needs, right? Like we've been taught not to believe our own bodies. So I think it's so entirely relevant.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, right? You know, but like, believe me can actually start with believing in yourself, right? When you hear those you can connect to that inner caregiver, and it's like, you know, I really don't think this intermittent fasting thing is really good for you, you know? You know, maybe it's time to eat, right? Or, you know, like we do have lots of medical challenges, right? And it's almost like we're supposed to be healthy at any cost. It's one of the reasons why I loved Samantha Irby's contribution, which I hope to get to in a little bit. But, but this idea of if we do have this interoceptive awareness and this attunement to our body, we might notice that our diarrhea could be coming from something that we ate that was off. It could be coming from a medical health condition, or it could be coming from too much stress and anxiety because of where we're at in the world today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to believe that we can know these things, right? And that we can, in a lot of times, in order to do the kind of self-advocacy we need to do to get the help we need, we have to believe that we know better than the quote unquote professionals a lot of the time. And that's really hard in a world where women especially, and relevant to Sam's essay, Black women most especially, are just taught that we are untrustworthy and basically helpless, right?
Right.
And then we end up believing that narrative too, because it's what we're told. We repeat those thoughts to ourselves, and it's like, oh, this must be who I am then.
Right. Yeah. And I think it helps to remember, and one of the things we're trying to get at in the book is that so many things depend on women not trusting their own experiences, right? Like that can be broadened out into so many issues.
Yeah. Okay. As per usual, I jumped way ahead of myself because I've been following you guys and reading you forever, but Actually Believe Me is not your first collaboration. And I would love if each of you could just take a minute and tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself, your background, and I'd especially love to hear about how you guys came to know each other and came to work together. So whoever wants to go first.
So I'm a feminist writer. I'm a columnist. I'm an author. I got started in the feminist blogosphere a million years ago and started a blog called Feministing. And that's actually how Jaclyn and I met, because Jaclyn was running this really super amazing organization and conference called WHAM, Women Action in Media. And I remember the first WHAM conference I went to, and we met, and it was just like this amazing experience with all these women journalists and these women activists and these women who are talking about media. And that's where we first met. And I don't know, it wasn't the first year. Was it the second or third year, Jaclyn, that we came up with Yes Means Yes? It was not too long after.
It was in 2007. The first WHAM conference was in 2004, but the one that I invited you to, your first WHAM conference was 2005. So
Right. So it was a couple of years after, but we knew each other through WHAM. And so to be able to figure out a way to collaborate, and I'll let Jaclyn tell the story of how that happened, because it really was like hilarious and serendipitous, was pretty amazing.
It was really amazing. Yeah. I call myself a feminist troublemaker. I really come to this work originally as an anti-rape activist. And slowly over the years, especially reading feminist blogs like Feministing, really came to understand through my work that if you want to shift rape culture, you have to shift the sexual culture in its entirety. And it's been my entree into feminist activism. Although also I was a shit stirrer as a teenager. I've always been me, as most of us have, right? So when I was running Women Action in the Media, it was our second conference. The first one was kind of an accidental conference that just sort of came together because the stars aligned. And then everyone said, oh, you have to do this again for real. And so when we were sitting down to plan it, I just started inviting everybody who I thought was great, who I was reading in the feminist blogosphere. And of course, first on that list was Jessica Valenti and the folks at Feministing. And so a couple years into Jessica coming to WHAM, we were at a Saturday night party at the conference in somebody's hotel room. And I had a piece that went the 2007 version of Viral earlier that year about how to talk about alcohol and rape without being victim blaming about it. And Jessica had just had, I think you Full Frontal was already out. And
it had just come out that I remember the first time I saw the book was actually at that conference.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so we were at this party. We were laying on somebody's hotel bed. I literally don't remember, drinking tequila and shooting the shit. And Jessica was like, you should write a book. My editor is right over there. You should pitch her something. And I said, my idea, Samita just took it, because Samita Mukhopadhyay, who was a Feministing editor and writer, and who's now the executive editor at Teen Vogue, had just sold Outdated, which is her book on feminism and dating. And that was the book that I had been thinking of doing. And so Jessica was like, why don't we do an anthology? It's been 10 years since the landmark anthology, Transforming a Rape Culture, which had a huge impact on both Jessica and I. There's all this conversation about affirmative consent and other ideas happening in the feminist blogosphere, and your piece went viral. And so we literally just called Brooke over and we're like, we want to do this book. And she was like, great, let's do it. And then I left that party and I was like, I didn't want to see either of them in the morning because I figured they would both be like, oh God, you thought we were serious?
Because there was some alcohol involved.
There's a little alcohol involved. But I always say, like, we did a backroom deal, like all the boys. Yeah, that's how the boys do it. And so that's what we did.
Except for the golf course, it was somebody random's hotel bed and a bottle of tequila, which sounds like a lot of fun.
A lot more fun than golf.
I was going to say.
That's our origin story for Yes Means Yes.
I love it. I love it so much. And so again, so the latest is Believe Me, How Trusting Women Can Change the World. So my first question for you is, why this book and why now?
I mean, in part, it was, we knew we wanted to do something. It's been 10 years since Yes Means Yes, which seems impossible.
I know.
But it has been. And so we had been talking a long time about doing something else. Would it be a second edition of Yes Means Yes? But obviously, the conversation has changed and broadened and progressed so much. And with all of the progress that Me Too has made, we knew that it couldn't just be another Yes Means Yes, right? Like we needed a new frame and something that spoke to the moment. And one of the things that was so exciting about Yes Means Yes that we did want to replicate was that it wasn't really just a book. It wasn't really just an anthology. What ended up happening was it became such an integral part of the conversation in a way that we didn't really expect. And now there are Yes Means Yes laws and school policies. And it really shifted the way that we think about the gold standard of consent. And that was really exciting. And we wanted to do that. We wanted to replicate that. And I think the idea of believing women and really honing in on that idea seemed so relevant to everything that was going on.
Well, and also, I feel like there's a lot of contention around the phrase believe me and believing women. And we really wanted to tease it out and be like, no, this is what we mean when we say believe women. And here's what's at stake. And here's how the world could look. Here's what we're missing out on by not believing women. One of the things that I think is so powerful about Yes Means Yes that we very carefully did again here is every essay is not just about something that's wrong, right? Every essay contains within it an idea of how the world could be different and, in fact, better if we believed women, if we treated women as fundamentally credible. And over and above credibility, and a number of the essays really get to this, it's not just enough to say women are credible. We have to say women are credible and important, right? So, Dahlia Lithwick has this amazing essay about the Kavanaugh Blasey Ford hearings and sort of the axis and being in the room for that happening. But the essay is really about how a ton of people really did believe Christine Blasey Ford, even on the right. They just decided it wasn't important enough, that what she was saying was not important. And
it was not important enough to speak up and support her.
Right.
To use their power to speak up and support her.
Exactly. And Catherine Cross has an essay that sort of takes off from Gamergate that explores the same idea, which is we heard from lots of the victims of Gamergate at the time. People just did not pay attention to them. They only wanted them to perform victimhood, but they didn't want to treat them as credible experts on what needed to change. So what this book is saying specifically is that believe me is a big idea. It gets treated on Twitter as this facile little pat thing where as though we're all saying everyone should just believe women every time they say anything, which of course is a ridiculous idea. But the argument actually is we desperately need a culture that treats women as both fundamentally baseline credible and important.
I mean, when I think about like body sovereignty, right? It's like there's so much gaslighting for women that we might not even be aware that kind of like, hey, this isn't right. So first, if we're lucky enough to be aware, then it's, well, use your voice to say this isn't right. But when we have this track record of not believing women, you become overcome by fear and maybe deny some of your experiences. So then it's back to the more gaslighting. How are we hoping that we can get out of that cycle and get things to change?
It's so hard because, when women say, well, I'm not going to be believed, a lot of the time they're right. Yep. Right. And they do have to trust that experience. And when we say to women, come forward, whether it's coming forward about sexual assault or just talking about your own personal experience with your body, right? Mm-hmm. Women know that they're not going to be believed. And so I think that there is some danger in just putting out this like sort of easy way, like, no, don't worry, we all have to speak out. We all have to speak our truths. Well, we know that there are consequences to that, mm-hmm. right? In a perfect world, that wouldn't be true, but often there are. And that was, I think, part of the reason with the book that we wanted to imagine, what would the world look like if that wasn't the case, if that fear wasn't there, if we knew that there would be, as Jaclyn said, that baseline acceptance of women as credible and important.
Yeah, I don't have any easy answers for how we get from here to there. I think that we do have to start by practicing ourselves, both believing ourselves, right? As we were talking about even in the beginning of the show, and listening to our bodies and our intuition and trusting, like learning to stare in the face of gaslighting and say, no, I know what I know, right? Which is hard. Like, I'm not saying that's a simple thing to do. That's a practice we all have to cultivate. But also in believing other women. I mean, I think as women, we also have a problem with trusting women. There's a study that I cite in my essay, which shows that young women who were polled in this study, I think it was in 2015 at Harvard, like a sad percentage of them, a depressingly large percentage of them preferred male leaders, right? Of women. So I think that we start in some ways with ourselves, which is to find where the bias against women's credibility is in ourselves and start literally, I think we really just fake it till we make it, right? Like we decide to act as though we believe in women's power and authority, and we can work our way there.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on asking this so early, but this was on my mind. So I'm going to ask it now because I feel like it's relevant. So the three of us being white women of privilege, education, several other privileges, where do you think white women are kind of faltering in our feminism and in uplifting each other's stories?
We're really self-focused.
Yeah.
Right. So we really mistake like the uplift of white women for the uplift of women, and nothing could be further than the truth, because when we only uplift white women, we're actually oppressing other women. And so we just think if we get ours, right? Like if some white lady gets promoted to the C-suite, like we're winning, and we fail to look at the system, right? None of us are free until we're all free. And that's harder. That's so much harder. Right? And so we want that sort of sugar rush of like feeling like we've got to win, and it blinds us.
Yeah. And speaking of blinding us, I feel like the other issue is that we do have these sort of blinders when it comes to the idea that all women are not feminists who are thinking about these issues. Mm-hmm. And so many white women, right, are still supporting Trump, are still supporting racist and sexist policies, and are still benefiting from those policies in a lot of ways. And so, again, as Jaclyn said, we can't sort of have this idea that like, oh, like if white women are fine, all women are fine. But that does seem to be the mainstream through line in a lot of conversations still. I'd like to think we've made some progress, and I think that social media has certainly helped that. I feel like it's democratized the debate in a different way, but there's a lot of work still to be done.
Yeah, certainly. I want to ask about the essayists for the book. How did you come to find them and choose them? What was it like behind the scenes?
We
Very
brainstormed.
glamorous.
Yes. Let me tell you the glamorous life of putting together a feminist anthology. We put together sort of a wish list of people that we thought we could figure out how to get asked to, some of whom we knew. But we also put out an open call for pitches, and which is another thing we learned from Yes Means Yes, that it was a blend of solicited essays and pitched essays. And we really thought that, some of the best essays in Yes Means Yes, as well as in Believe Me, came in through the open call. So we wanted to reach out to some of the amazing people we knew or we knew we wanted in a curatorial way, but we also knew that there was going to be stuff we didn't know and people we didn't know to ask who had great things to say. So it was a blend, and it was also just incredibly painful. Like, we left so much good stuff on the cutting room floor.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
It made us wish we could do like 2 or 3 more editions.
I'm honestly still thinking about certain of them.
Or a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Oh, man. Well, there's so much I liked about the collection and how they were woven together. And but when I got to Samantha Irby's, it reminded me of an interview I did with Maya Dusenberry about her book Doing Harm, about how women aren't believed for their pain. And, if you're also a woman of color, you're more likely to be seen as a drug seeker and highly tolerant to pain. And so her essay really resonated with me as somebody who counsels clients who often deal with things like Crohn's disease or IBS or fibromyalgia, other really painful conditions. So I would just love to hear, any sort of backstory or any sort of reflective insight you have about that essay that you wanted to share today.
Well, I mean, with Sam Irby, like, who wouldn't want Sam Irby to write for their anthology? Right?
It was really funny. It was really fun and funny to read, which you need because it's like dark, heavy.
Well,
I was sinking into my chair, and then she lifted me up. But still, it's like, this is BS, but I'm gonna kind of give humor through it.
Right, and that's part of what Sam does so well. She can really thread that needle of writing about something so difficult and so important and so painful, but also sort of like make it tolerable and funny and poignant for the reader, which is so important. As you said, these are really tough topics, right? Yeah. All of the issues in the book are really difficult. And I think, women have had a rough couple of years, and talking and thinking about these things is really hard and like triggering and can be awful. And so it's nice to have someone like Sam who can bring you to that place.
And if this were a man with Crohn's disease, he would be believed. That's the bottom line, right? So why are we not believing Sam's painful experience when we're believing any other man's painful experience?
Or even possibly a white woman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Can we talk about the essay Do Not Pet? That was another favorite of mine.
I love that essay.
It was so good.
Yeah, what should we talk about? She's such a brilliant writer.
I think just what really pulled me in was, even though I don't have her lived experience, I could feel what that must feel like to have this. Literally, she talks about, this dog is helping me survive, and you're treating me like I'm a lesser human and wanting me to go on like the freight elevator where I live, or, and her rights were being violated, laws were being broken left and right. And this is oppressive. And so to me, it speaks to how far we have to go as a culture and in understanding disability rights and just dealing with our biases around disability as well.
Yeah, and the intersection of disability and other issues of believability. So that essay is by Anuradha Bhagwati, who has her own brilliant book about her time getting into the Marine Corps and then taking on the Marine Corps over issues of sexual harassment. It's called Unbecoming, and it's being turned into a movie. So her essay is about having experienced trauma both in and out of the military, needing a service dog in order to help her deal with that trauma. And then because her disability is invisible, being disbelieved that she needs the service dog, right? So the levels of disbelief, which have to do, again, with her being a brown woman specifically, and also the kinds of trauma that are not visible, right? That are not treated as credible, right? If she had a disability where she couldn't see, and was wearing sunglasses, which is one of the things the instructor suggests, actually, is sort of like, literally in the essay, she says like this, the instructor said, like, there was a time when I just pretended I was blind because it was easier, right? Not to say that blind people have it easier, but in terms of being believed about needing the dog. She obviously doesn't do that. So just the sort of grappling with just the layers and intersections of disbelief in that essay were what were so powerful for me. It's like a Russian nesting doll of disbelief, and how she just has to come to believe in herself and Duke, right? That is ultimately her refuge, is what we were talking about earlier, which is that you have to start with yourself and that you have to find a place. And it's not easy, right? I don't want to sound proud about this, but it's about her journey to find a place where she can still feel outrage and she can still fight all of that discrimination she's facing. And she can actually do it better because she believes she deserves it. That she has to believe in herself in a world that continues to fail. It's very powerful. I love that essay.
Yeah. It's disappointing that she does have to put forth that extra emotional labor to kind of keep on keeping on. But that's exactly the whole point for, the essays in this book, right? Every one of them in their own way are trying to focus the reader on the systems and structures that are in place that keep women from being believed, that keep, all women being oppressed in some way. And mostly the more marginalizations you have, the more oppressions that you're going to carry, the harder it is, the more emotional labor you have to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then I loved constructing the future as well. Just kind of even just like there were just stats in there that I was like, for real? Like stuff I couldn't believe is how all the big tech giants are almost all men and predominantly white males, and how the power that tech companies carry and how like shifting that dynamic by, having more women in leadership roles in the world actually changes the technology from the inside out. So any insight on that essay?
I feel like I learned so much from that, right? Like I operate in online spaces. I operate in this world. I work in this world. This is where I've been. But it's so nice to like edit and see an essay where you're like, oh, wow, like I'm actually learning a lot. And I have not thought about these issues. And I think a lot of people haven't thought about them because it's not something that we talk about all that much.
And it's literally the structure in which we're operating. Like we're operating right now. We are recording this podcast on the internet. We scheduled it on the internet. And all of the platforms that we use to communicate, to do this thing we are doing literally now, are designed and controlled by mostly white, almost entirely men. And that has profound repercussions just in terms of the assumptions that they make and don't make, the bias that they don't see because they assume that they are neutral. Soraya Chemaly is a total visionary talking about the systems of the internet.
It kind of paves the way for online harassment and, kind of opens the door for that to continue. Whereas if you had the positions of power being held by women who want to change that system, then the tools are built from the inside out correctly to actually address online harassment. The policies are in place to address it. It also reminds me of just, what gets through, what comments get through, how do things get reported that they're harmful, and who is looking at that saying, yes, I agree or disagree. So, and that's all kind of forms of traumatizing people or re-traumatizing people.
Yeah. And also, like, I always say I've worked on online harassment. I've actually collaborated with Soraya Chemaly on some organizing stuff. People are always like, well, how should we fix it? Right. It's really difficult to address online harassment. And I'm always like, these people are actually very smart, right? If they can invent a self-driving car, right? They can figure, if they wanted to put the resources in, they can put the resources in. So like the idea, those questions always get turned around on people outside the system, that I have like a whole job and a life over here. And it is not like deciding how Twitter should address online harassment. It should be enough for me to say they should do fucking better, right? Like if they cared, they could pour an enormous amount of resources into creative solutions to that problem.
Right. And if there was money on the line, they would, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
YouTube has a whole algorithm, has a whole system for taking down copyrighted material, right? So like, but somehow they can't find racism and sexism and terrible sorts of harassment and threats. Right? Like when there is money on the line, they find a way to make it happen.
Wow, that's a good point. So it's the money power situation. I'm imagining that there are listeners who have influence and power more than maybe they think they do in using their voice. And so what could, people in power do now, as a result of reading the book, being more aware to the injustices that are taking place? And then what? I know there was a great essay where I just wrote down, listening will never be enough. And I was like, oh, that's good, because you hear a lot of I'm listening, right? And that's an important thing to do, to step back and listen. But also hearing that listening won't be enough is really powerful. So what's the actions?
Right. The action is treat us, again, like not just that we're credible, but that we're important, right? So listening is actually a tactic that college administrations often use to silence, ironically, student survivor activists, because they know students will graduate. And so they listen to their complaints, and they listen, and they were like, we'll form a committee and we'll listen and think some more. And then they just wait people out. So listening is only a useful thing to do if it's a first step, and not if it's the action. It's not a complete action. So one of the things that I want to challenge folks to do is notice how you feel when you try on the idea that the women around you are credible about the oppression that they've experienced, the systemic injustices that they're up against. Because there are a lot of studies, and I talk about this in my essay, that show that we actually dislike women the more credible we find them. The reverse is true in men. We like men who we find credible. We dislike women who we find credible. And so...
And is that other women or everybody?
It's everybody. Everybody. And so a place to start is, let's think about the upcoming primary, right? Mm-hmm. Like I remember in the 2016 election when all the sort of lefties were like, I would love to have a woman candidate. I just don't want this woman. I wish Elizabeth Warren was running. And now that Elizabeth Warren is running, those same people are like, oh, I would love for a woman candidate to be running, just not this woman because she used to be a Republican and blah, blah, like
broken record.
Right. When we're asked to actually find women credible and powerful, we viscerally recoil a lot of the time. And so we all have to do that work on ourselves. But also, if we have power in our lives over a circle of friends, policies at work, the rules of the school you work at, wherever it is that all of us have influence over some small, minor, mini culture, right? Mm-hmm. And I want everybody listening to think about how that culture would be different if women were treated as equally credible and important to men, and then go about starting to do that.
Yeah. And it's so kind of what we were talking about at the very, very beginning, if you can get to an awareness, so for listeners, it could be just taking a little bit of time with a piece of paper and a pen and just think about ways in which you've had an experience and maybe you wanted to say something but didn't, or, whether it was because you're supposed to be nice or don't want to rock the boat, don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Like, think about a few life events like that and, let yourself kind of think through, even if it was long ago or whatnot, right? What would you say if you could go back to that time? What would today's version of you say? Write it on a piece of paper. You're not doing it in real life yet, right? But you're just practicing that self-advocacy aspect of it. And then really think about, okay, well, what if you lived your life where you took a brave step forward and in your job, asked for some equality, asked for some listening, asked for some sharing of power, or in your school system where your kids are going, if that is applying to you, anywhere in your community. But, I do think we doubt the value of our impact. I'm just a little person or whatnot. And I think that what does that do, right? Keeps us silent.
And that's literally another way that we disbelieve ourselves as women when we do that. But there's a lot of I don't mean to be a shill on but we are here to promote the book.
Yeah.
There are a lot of concrete ideas in the book. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm thinking right now, like Monica Ramirez, who wrote the essay about how workplaces could be structured around believing employees about harassment and treating harassment as important. There's a great example from, I think it's like Homeroom Mac and Cheese is the name of the restaurant in California that realized like their servers were having to put up with a lot of harassment, and the structures that they had around dealing with it basically disincentivized reporting and or if they did get reported, disincentivized taking action against customers, right? Which you can understand why that would be so. And so they all said, oh, this is important, right? This is not only credible, we believe this is happening, but it's important. And the owners on down sat down and said, like, how can we devise an entirely different system of handling this so that it's not on the person who's being targeted to like make a big hue and cry, and that it's, everybody takes it seriously in a way that's systematized and baked into the cake. And they came up with this really elegant system that's working really well. And what do you know, helping them retain great workers on top of it, right? So the book is full of specific ideas of changes that could be made.
Yeah, I agree. And shill away. It's a fabulous book. I'm going to take a major pivot and ask if we could talk just for a couple minutes about BDSM.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm always here for that. You know me.
I knew you would be. So the essay is from Sassafras Lowry, who this was the first time I came to know this person. So what can you share about the essay contribution and how it could be helpful?
So that essay is one of the ones that came in through the open call, which I mention only because when Jess and I read the pitch, it was basically about how they had come up as a homeless kid, right? They had to leave their house because it was not safe for them to be a queer person there. And the homeless community they came up in really did believe them as a survivor, right? And they all did believe each other. And they kind of came up in, it's certainly not a utopia. Like they were homeless queer kids, right? But at the same time, had the experience that we were trying to help people envision. And we were like, oh, we have to hear this story, right? Mm-hmm. Because this is like a dispatch from the future and that we're trying to create in some ways. And so the essay really is about how they happened upon, in this incredibly distressing time of their life, this community that was really living these values. And they were understanding it through the frame of BDSM, which for the uninitiated stands for a whole bunch of things, depending on who you ask, but largely bondage, dominance, submission, and masochism and or sadomasochism. The letters sometimes do double duty in the acronym. I don't know. So basically kinky stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Specifically having to do with power exchange. And I don't want to, and I think the essay does a good job of not romanticizing BDSM communities, because of course abuse happens in BDSM communities as well. But when practiced well, right, the the philosophy of the community that Sassafras was in really practices a lot of active affirmative communication, really recognizes the places of trauma that people are operating from, and gives them space to just explicitly negotiate and be validated around them, because those kinds of scenes often require a lot of negotiation to set up correctly. And that explicit sexual communication, as well as sort of the tight-knit community, really proved to be a community where survivors were already being believed. And it's really about sort of the magic of that.
Yeah.
And just to add one more thing, I think what was so important and like what I really took from their essay was that, and I think they have a line in there about this, that this wasn't just about like an idea, right? Like believing survivors wasn't just about an ideology or a politics for them in this community. It was literally how the community was structured. It was a tangible thing. And to be able to think about that being a reality, I think is a really forward-thinking, exciting idea. And that's the sort of stuff we were really hoping to get for the book.
Yeah. What really resonated with me, it was an excellent essay in and of itself. And I was reading Believe Me, as well as Peggy Orenstein's book, which is out now too, Boys and Sex.
Oh, I haven't read the new one yet.
It literally just came out a couple days ago. So we're going to have a chat and she'll be on the podcast too. But I was literally reading both of your books while I was on a yoga retreat. That sort of end of the year, kind of like, get me out of here. I need to get ready for 2020. I just saw such a deep connection between the power of community and the power of open communication, and sort of the flip side in Peggy's book about, this sort of white male generated porn for white males, and how consent is not showing up in the younger generation, so high school to college. And it just, so to me, like they were like the opposing ends, I guess. Like, what Peggy is calling for is a clear and open partners to ask what each other likes or is into, and to have these conversations so that sex can be pleasurable and enjoyable and consensual, and they're not to be the blurry line, so to speak. So for me, there was like this integration of why that particular essay was showing up in Believe Me, and what Peggy was seeing in her research in interviewing over 100 boys coming up today, and that there's clearly this need to figure out what our boundaries are, what we like, have permission to like things, have whatever sort of sexual health is calling us, to not have shame around that, but then to be able to talk about it and advocate for it. And as you have originated, yes means yes. And believe us. So one final question. And, I think a lot of listeners, like, they might do social justice work, or they're more woke to sort of social justice. So whether it comes in from, non-diet and self-care and practicing body kindness, but then, they'll hear something else about an oppressive thing. And it can feel like I've got this backpack on, you just put a 20-pound weight in it, and then another one. And it's like I'm kind of collapsing, it can feel like too much, or like I'm personally responsible for fixing everything. And I think in a lot of ways it can feel, I guess, it could actually create almost like a powerlessness feeling. And so I just wonder if either one of you have any sort of, I don't know, whether it's something that you do for yourself to kind of keep your energy going, or any sort of helpful, I don't know if it's a daily routine or whatever, but you know what I mean, but just something that helps you feel grounded and uplifted when you're noticing that you need that, so that you can keep,
sure,
pushing the culture forward, but without feeling like you're sacrificing all of your well-being.
Sure. I think one of the things that I try to remember with that backpack getting heavier and heavier, like the more you read or the more you're online, is I try to remember that backpack was already there and pretty heavy, right? And that becoming aware of it does not mean that it wasn't there. It just means now I can do something about it. And now I can figure out a way to maybe more evenly distribute that weight or get that weight off of me in some way. And I do think that we have that problem of feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to fix the world. I have to fix everything, right? What's been really useful for me to feel like I can continue to do this work and continue to take on this fight without feeling like I'm losing or backtracking all the time is that I try to have sort of small reachable goals for myself with this work, right? And so like when my first book, Full Frontal Feminism, came out, for example, I didn't say to myself, like, I'm going to fix feminism, like I'm going to make feminism amazing. And this book is going to be a New York Times bestseller and it's going to be incredible and it's going to change the world. What I said to myself was, I really hope that this book changes some young women's minds about feminism or makes some young women feel like maybe they actually are feminists. And that did happen. And it was a goal that I set for myself that I knew was possible. And so I could take that little win and go on to the next thing. And so that big, broad work is always there, but there are ways that we can take some manageable chunks out of it and about like, okay, what are goals I know that I can meet that will allow me to still do this work?
I totally co-sign all of that. There's a ancient Jewish proverb that is my touchstone and has been my whole life and my activist life, which is, it is not yours to complete the work, neither is it yours to desist from it, right? And so all of us need to just figure out which part of the work we can do. It's a struggle, right? Like today, the day we are recording this, it feels like more of a struggle than ever. There is so much going on right now, but it doesn't help anybody if we just get overwhelmed and either work ourselves to death or get paralyzed with overwhelm or, any of those options. So I think setting measurable and small goals is definitely part of my strategy. I would say in terms of like self-care, I really like to chill out in the kitchen. I just got a KitchenAid mixer for my birthday finally. Yay. And super in love with it. And we just got the pasta attachment and I'm really excited to start making ravioli. I don't know why I'm just like completely fixated on making ravioli, partially because also I can't have gluten or cow's milk dairy. So like ravioli is a hard thing for me to go out and get.
Well, in the summer, I enjoyed all your ice creams and the interesting flavor combinations. So now I'm looking forward to the winter flavor names and
winter raviolis.
I think I've been making ice cream about politics. I may start making ravioli about politics. We shall see. So yeah, the kitchen for sure. And also like, just some like mild, like not like, oh, I'm going to go have a workout, but like I live not that far from Walton Pond and like walking the loop around Walton Pond, it always 100% of the time clears my head. So there's just some like it's the combination of movement and getting out in nature really is incredibly grounding for me.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. The book is Believe Me, How Trusting Women Can Change the World. And it's available everywhere you get books and ebooks. And is there going to be an audiobook?
Oh, yeah, we recorded it.
Yep.
So there's actors reading a lot of the essays, but Jess and I got to read our bits, which was great. So that should come out, I think, the same time as everything else.
Oh, wonderful. And so Jessica Valenti and Jaclyn Friedman, where can folks find and follow and connect with you? Because they're going to get the book and read it and love it, and they're going to want to be on top of all your great work. So
unfortunately, mostly on Twitter.
You have 180 characters to bitch about the world.
Right. I am mostly there, but full name on all the social media places that you probably are.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm Jaclyn F on Twitter and Jaclyn Effable on Instagram. I'm JaclynFriedman.com. And I also have my own podcast, which is called Unscrewed, and folks can hang out with me there too.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll make sure I include the link to the Unscrewed chat on Body Kindness and then the Body Kindness chat on Unscrewed so that they can find all those things. And I'll include all your social handles and links to the book and everything. Once again, thank you so much for being here. It was a really powerful conversation. And thanks for doing the book. It's a really helpful way to learn, through people's stories, not just like do this, do that, like checklists. It was really, really helpful.
I'm so glad. Thank you.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.